So I'm gonna take you back to 2007 and 8, right? You were studying abroad in Amsterdam, and you were riding your bike, and you had an epiphany. What happened?
Well, I was studying in the Netherlands for about a year, and there's this crazy thing. Everyone in Holland bicycles every single day. It's crazy.
What's like the number like of people who bike around?
I think it's like 90% of people who bike every single day. And so when I was
amazing.
there, I'm half Dutch, so I was born with the height gene, but I wasn't born with the gene that lets you text while biking. And I was really worried about like dropping my new phone into the canal, which they're everywhere.
Not yourself, but the phone.
Yeah, that was the bigger thing that I was worried about.
That's awesome.
And I wanted to be able to see who was calling or texting me without having to take my phone out of my pocket while I was biking.
Yeah.
And that's when it hit me to start working on, actually it started off as a bike computer that would show you text messages, but then someone said, hey, there are some people that don't bike every single moment of their life. And they said, what if you made it a watch? And that's when the idea started.
And your dad was involved early on. I remember you talking about how like he was instrumental with like the watch, right, on the bike. What happened there?
Well, I was really lucky. I was able to actually the first money that we ever raised as a company came from pitch competitions, which I hear you got one. Yeah. So I did a 30-second pitch competition, and I won one of those gigantic checks.
Oh, really?
That was the first investment.
So 30 seconds, that's a real elevator pitch.
That was exactly.
We were giving people 10 minutes.
I know, that's way too long. If you can't describe it in 30 seconds, yeah. And then I was really lucky. My parents gave me $10,000, and they said, well, it's cheaper than business school.
Yeah.
And that was the first kind of real investment that we got. And then, of course, my parents and my family, they were the first beta testers of the product. This was back in the...
How did you convince your parents, like, what is this watch? Or is it more like, oh, it's my son's project, I'm definitely going to...
I think when you look at when you look at the cost of like postgraduate education, I think they looked at it as somewhat more affordable. Plus, it was Canadian dollars. So.
Yeah, fair enough.
But no, it was back in 2008. Did anyone have a BlackBerry back in 2000? Does anyone still have a BlackBerry?
Are you a lawyer?
One person, okay. So we were based in Waterloo, which is where I met you. And everyone had a BlackBerry. And it was probably because it was 2008, but it was also probably because BlackBerry was headquartered in Waterloo. So.
And then you basically like kind of partnered up with them over the iPhone, even though you wanted to almost drop your iPhone.
Yeah, it was weird. I started with an iPhone, and then I picked up a BlackBerry. Yeah. It was actually easier to build software for the BlackBerry at the time than iPhone. That changed quickly.
Yeah.
But our watch, the very first watch before Pebble, only worked exclusively with BlackBerry.
Yeah.
So
what was that called?
Well, I mean, I think we learned our lesson 2 years later when we moved down to the Bay Area. We did a program called Y Combinator, and we learned about this thing called iPhone. It was this really popular phone outside of Waterloo, and we started making a watch that worked with iPhone. That was what would become Pebble.
Yep. So you're talking. We talked a lot about Waterloo. So when I went and visited back in 2007, I was curious, right? I was like, I saw these two guys we invested in back when I was in Plug and Play, and I was like, I met 2 to 3 people in gaming and other stuff, Kevin Lee, and that you know really well, and I'm like, I got to go up there. So I convinced like my boss to fly me up there, and that's when I met you, and I'm like, wow, this is a special place. So what is it about Waterloo that now people like Paul Graham, Sam Altman of Y Combinator say it probably even performs as well, if not better, than Stanford when it comes to startup founders? I mean, it's a big testament, and it helps. Obviously, you've gone through Y Combinator.
I think as a lot of you guys know, it's the school. Like the point of going to school is not just to learn and not just to study, but it's also to be around people who are really motivated and engaged. I think that's one thing that Waterloo has. So they have a co-op program where you go to school, and you go to school for 4 months, and then you work for 4 months, and you flip back and forth between school and work for 5 years. And that, I think, causes so many entrepreneurs to be born because they all get the chance to work at real companies.
Where did you work?
And I worked at a bank. I worked at a building engineering firm. I worked at a large defense contractor. And I pretty much learned after doing 5 of these co-op programs that I didn't really want to have a real job. And so I ended up starting a company in my final year of engineering because I already had the chance to learn what life was like.
That's pretty awesome.
And I think, but to answer your question, like that's why I think so many entrepreneurs have come out of Waterloo, because they get the chance to see what it's like to to work 9 to 5 and to experience that, and then they try that out and they give it a shot and they realize that no, there's actually something else that they might be interested in, an idea or a project that they're working on, and then they just say kind of like, screw it, I'm going to go off and start a company instead.
Yeah, I mean, that's the notion of a whole internship, right? Like, go get a job, internships in the summertime, get that experience. It's not easy. Waterloo is an amazing job. They actually call companies and say, hey, we have X amount of engineers, and companies are like, yeah, let's talk, like, so. I think that outreach, and not much schools still to this day, like University of Cincinnati, that we get like designers come to our like Pebble and
to do internships.
Yeah, like, so, what was it like, especially coming, let's say, did you work in Canada? Did you work here?
No, I only worked in Canada. I really wish that as an intern I came down to the Bay Area. So if you guys are running companies, I would highly recommend going out to Waterloo and recruiting. They make the process super easy. You get some friendly Canadians for 4 months to come down. And I think the biggest thing is that we've started meeting people earlier in their careers. Makes it much easier to recruit them after they graduate out of school.
Yeah, and then you came and like, what was the notion? Did you get into Y Combinator, or what was it like? Oh, I'm going to go to Silicon Valley. What, like, did you fly out here a couple of times and get?
Well, I mean, a lot of people who grow up outside of Silicon Valley, unlike you, who had the chance to be here right from the get-go, you always hear about it. You always hear about Silicon Valley, and it's this weird thing that I'm sure exists in a lot of other countries as well, but there's a lot of like nationalistic pride about Canada, just like many other countries.
Hey, congrats on Trudeau, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a fan of him or not.
And when I was there in Waterloo, there was always this like kind of weird, like, are you going to leave Canada and go down to the Bay Area and give up kind of on doing your startup here in Canada? And a lot of people try to tell you that no, you should stay there, you should stay in Canada.
There are incentives too, by the way.
There's great incentives, yeah. But then I think there's when it came down to the Valley in 2011, I had never lived here before. I'd never worked here before. I'd always heard stories, and I'd seen. Has anyone else seen Pirates of Silicon Valley, like one of the old Steve Jobs movies? Better than the recent Steve Jobs, I think.
That's pretty good, yeah.
But yeah, so you'd heard all the stories, you'd heard all the rumors, and I was wondering if it was actually true, if there was actually the magic in the Bay Area that everyone had talked about. When we got down here in 2011, it was me, a partner, and 2 interns that we smuggled down and brought down.
Smuggled.
And it was special. Like we didn't really know exactly what to expect. We were down here for 3 months. It was our first time, and
did you get already into Y Combinator then? Or?
Yeah, that was for Y Combinator. And I was actually planning on returning to Canada after 6 months. I was going to give it a shot, see how it went in the Bay Area, because we had heard that it's so expensive, that it's really hard to hire people, that it's tough to get investment, there's so much competition. But the thing that stuck with me after getting here is the sheer ability that the network brings you to succeed faster and better.
And do you have an example of this?
Yeah, I mean, one of my really good friends that I met here 4.5 years ago, we met in a bar in Palo Alto because we were just hanging out, and I was wearing one of our first watches, and he saw it, and we started talking, and it turned out that he was the CTO of another hardware company that had like 5 or 6 people. So we were at the exact same stage in our careers, and we were just growing, and that kind of thing is almost, it's not impossible outside of the Bay Area, but it's so much more unlikely that it felt like this is the place for me. And so we moved the company to Palo Alto, we set up shop there. We were still only 3 or 4 people. This was before our Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. And so we suffered through the days of like not having enough money and working out of the living room of our house where everyone lived in. And I think, the one, on top of the network, the value of the network, the other thing that's really powerful is just the intrinsic motivation that people here have to help each other in a way that I wouldn't have expected. I would not have expected that this many people that are so high-powered and so, working on their own thing would be happy to take the time and sit down and go for a coffee and talk about some of the problems that they've had, so that hopefully you can avoid the same ones. It's weird. Like, it's almost counterintuitive that you'd think that so many people are fighting for their lives, trying to raise money in an ultra-competitive market for hiring and for talent. Anyway, so the support network has been great.
I call Silicon Valley like a professional college, right? Like where everybody's together in the same area and vicinity and like can mind share like crazy and fast.
Yeah. And I try to think about that now, especially now that hardware is kind of a thing and it's blowing up, which is awesome.
Thanks to you.
Well, thanks. I think the biggest thing that helped us was like the proliferation of smartphones that have caused the entire IoT and the whole market for Bluetooth accessories to just explode.
Yeah.
But that's been great. And so when we were suffering through in 2011, we had maybe like $50,000 left in the bank account, which sounds like a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But as everyone knows, like rent in San Francisco alone could eat up that in a couple of months. So we were at the beginning of 2012. We had this idea for Pebble. It was the first watch that would work with iPhone. And it solved all of these problems that we had with our first product, bugs that had been reported. And we did what everyone tries to do, which is go and raise money. Mm-hmm. And we thought, like, we'd already sold 1,000 or 1,500 of our first product. We had this new design. We'd gone through Y Combinator. We had a great network, had an awesome network. We thought, oh yeah, it'll be easy. We'll raise like $1 million, and we'll be able to build this new watch. But
what happened?
I mean, it was.
I heard this thing, like you've told the story on like TV and stuff, like you had the 100 no's, right? And Brian right now just said, I tell employees that I hire that the no's are motivation to you, right? And so like, what was it that like you fed off of it?
I'm sure that like, looking back, the no's are motivational, but they really feel bad. I mean, yeah. we had been working on this for like three or 4 years at that point, and this was our life. This was like me and Andrew, our CTO, and Rahul. This was the only thing that we had been working on for years. And to hear 40 VCs in a row just say no, everyone was interested. I think that's one of the rough things about the Valley is that everyone is interested. Everyone's kind of positive, which is a little bit distracting at some points because people are positive to the point where they have to sign a check, and then you might get a little.
They always say it's like wait till it's in the bank. For a reason, right? And
so we didn't get anything in the bank. Like I talked to 40 investors and got all these no's. And this was literally 1 month before our Kickstarter, if you can believe it. Wow. So we had $50,000 left in the bank account. We had literally 6 months of runway, and we were completely unable to raise money.
So I am a big believer in opportunities come like in like minimum times in your life that could be impactful, right? And so that happened to you. Literally, you said a month later. What, exactly. Like so you were like, what happened? You said you have a story about Paul Graham.
It was the last thing on our minds, raising money on Kickstarter. Like at the time in 2012, Kickstarter wasn't really the thing that it is now.
It was for films and games and like indies.
Music and that kind of thing. Yeah. There had been a couple hardware companies that have done it, but it was still relatively new. We ended up filming the video ourselves. Started me, the interns, some of my friends in Redwood City, and we just posted it online. We posted the project online and started spreading the word to some of the bloggers and to some of the friends that we knew. And we didn't expect that much. I think we were trying to raise about $100,000, which would have been enough to make 1,000 or 1,500 watches. And that would have been great because we had this new design. It was in our minds. We had some prototypes, and we really wanted it ourselves. It was a product that we truly wanted. When we posted it on Kickstarter, I still remember the morning. It was like a crazy time. Like I'll never be able to forget what that morning was because we posted it, and we were expecting to maybe raise $5,000 or $10,000 in the first day. That would have been amazing, and we ended up raising $560,000 in the first day. And it was a moment where your life just changes dramatically from like minute to minute.
So you went from, oh, we could totally do this to, oh my God, how do we do this?
It was more like my mom would phone me up and she was like, Eric, you now have to make 10,000 watches. Are you ready for that?
And then wait till what happened at the end of that month, right?
And then throughout the whole month, we ended up raising $10 million, and we had to make 85,000 watches. So it's a bit of a holy shit moment. Where it's like,
so basically, you became like a real entity in people's lives at that point. Not to say like
it took a while before we became a real company, but at the point we had a lot of obligations to ship product to our backers, the people who supported us on Kickstarter.
Yep. So speaking of which, I was going to say like about Pebble, right? Like you like Kickstarter legitimized like and scaled your life, company as a whole. What is it that you day in and day out you wake up and you're like, this is Pebble. Like, I got to do this.
I think for us, we had been working on this for about 4 years, and this is one of the toughest things about doing a startup is that there's so many things that you have to get right. You have to get the product right, you have to get the market right, you have to get the explanation of your product, like the marketing, correct, and if you and money, and if you don't get any of these, if you don't get a single one of these things, it doesn't click. And so what I think we saw click with our Kickstarter was how we explained the product. For 4 years leading up to that point, I've been mis-explaining it. I've been explaining the wrong thing.
So this is what a lot of people miss. Like, oh, how do you do a Kickstarter? You guys crushed it. Like, you put 4 years of effort and time into that.
And we had screwed it up all the times before that. And so this was luckily the right thing at the right time. And what we did was we simplified the message of what the product was down to three pretty simple things. We said that it was a watch that showed you notifications. For people that get a lot of email or text messages or people who go biking, you can quickly glance down and see what's happening. The second thing we said was Pebble's a great activity tracker. It connects to Runkeeper, it connects to Strava, and lets you see what's happening when you're going for a run or going for a bike ride. And the third thing was relatively, it wasn't something that people expected. It was downloading watch faces. And I mean, this was 2012, so it was before the time where everything has an app store. Now, your car has an app store, your toaster has an app store. We were the first people to come up with an app store for a watch, and that was the third element of our pitch that I think really resonated with people. The idea that you could buy this for $120 and customize it and change it and even write software for it and build software for it. And those simple messages, like we didn't complicate it. We didn't say that this was like a computer on your wrist. We didn't say that it was like a smartphone on your wrist. We said that it just did those three things. Cost $120, it worked with your iPhone, it was a sports watch, and that resonated. And I think that, you know, we wouldn't have been able to do it. Sometimes people ask, like, what would you have changed if you could look back and talk to old Eric before he grew a beard? What would you change? And to be honest, like, I wouldn't change that much, because all of the things that we ran into, all of the problems that we ran into, we had to in order for us to get to the point where we had learned the lessons. And you know, there's another thing where it's like, everyone has advice. Even I'm trying to give advice right now. Most of it is useless. Most of it is totally inappropriate for your position or your company. And I think like we had to go through a lot of those pain points in order to get to the point where we could explain our product and have that kind of correct product market fit.
So yeah, you've been doing this for 7 years, and just a little shameless plug for Pebble that I'm fortunate enough to work there, right? So like, I guess a quick thing additional, I wanted, for timing, I have a few more questions. One is about Pebble, right? Like, how has it been, you know, from like the first days to now running the company? And by the way, we have a lot of high quality people you want to potentially hire besides me who are Persian. I'm the only Persian, by the way, there, so.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, we definitely
have
have
Nina,
some work
who's
to do.
Armenian,
Yeah.
but.
I think for us, the biggest thing that's changed over this last 7 or 8 years has been, well, I guess our success 3 years ago on Kickstarter, but it's really the increase in competition. And this is one thing where anyone who's ever pitched on investors always has a slide where they talk about their competition. And for 3 years leading up to the launch of the Apple Watch, I always was faced with one of the toughest questions that you could ever get faced with, which is, so what are you going to do if Google or Apple makes a watch? And it's kind of one of those things that everyone faces on a regular basis when you're pitching investors, because it's a good question, and it's a serious question. And I had to answer that for 3 years before Apple ended up launching their watch with some crazy answer. I would just spew words, because at the end of the day, it was just a rumor. There was nothing that you can actually say that would convince a person who's set on the idea that Apple is going to be able to make the perfect product, the ultimate product.
It's kind of healthy, though. I mean, they still ask. I mean, the other day you were in Web Summit, NBC was asking you, right? And so, like, it's like, hey, we're right there.
And that's one of those things where, like, when Apple ended up launching their watch about a year ago, people said, oh man, what's going to happen? Is Pebble going to die? Are you guys totally screwed? And I was like, I'm actually glad that they finally launched it, because I had to deal with the question without them actually having made the product for like 4 years leading up to that point. So I was a little bit happy that they released their product and they got it out into the world. But I think what's become pretty clear over the last year or so is Apple has gotten into the market, Google has gotten into the market, Samsung, everyone and their mother, well, not my mother, but everyone almost is making a smartwatch. And I think it's very clear, like Pebble, we've chosen a lot of things we've chosen a very distinct and different path that we're taking, where Apple and Google seem to be using smartphone components, and they seem to be shrinking down the size of a smartphone to fit it on your wrist. We're taking the path of what's a great watch experience, and then let's make that a little bit smart. So we just released a product a couple weeks ago where we created the first round and tiny and thin Pebble smartwatch. It's the smallest smartwatch. It looks a lot like an actual watch.
Tara's still mine, so you can
Oh,
talk
she's
to her.
got And I think for us, like where we see Apple and Google building kind of the more luxury end of the market, that's totally cool. They built a great watch. It really is selling well, and they've got a great market that they're building out for them. But it's definitely more of the luxury. It's almost more like the Rolex or the Tag of the smartwatch world. We, on the other hand, we're building something a little bit more fun, a little bit more colorful, a little bit more customizable, a little bit more affordable. I think we're building almost the Swatch of smartwatches. And that's given us the chance to really define a path to the market. It's different, it's not exactly the same, and I'm sure there will be a lot of people who choose the Apple Watch, but I think we've got some options on our side that are extremely compelling, and we're seeing those do pretty well. In fact, we ended up going back to Kickstarter this year, and we launched our second Kickstarter.
Yeah, which was a lot of fun. That morning was like entertaining to say the least. And one last question before I get to audience is technology, right? We're in the middle of Silicon Valley. Obviously, you're excited about Pebble. What other technologies that inspire you? You see, you're like, wow, you're like, that's very cool, and you want to be part of.
I think it's both something that we're working on as well as something that a ton of other people are working on, and that's like wearable sensors and IoT sensors. I feel like because of the smartphone, how it's exploded and everyone has this computer sitting in their pocket, there's all these other devices that are popping up in our daily lives that track our health, that track our fitness, that track things around the house. I think these are going to be very interesting, especially as the cost keeps coming down. It's almost inevitable that we will be wearing more technology on our bodies. It's going to be cheap, it's going to help us live a little bit better, live a little bit more healthy. And I see a ton of companies working on this right now. It's very cool.